Every full moon, Kemi vanished. No one in Jebu questioned it, not the old women who whispered behind their wooden stalls, not the fishermen who avoided the shore at night. But Toby, the new contractor in town, noticed. He noticed how Kemi always locked her doors before sunset, how she never ate fish, and how her skin never seemed to dry. Then one night, curiosity became something more. He followed her. Through winding dirt paths, past swaying palm trees, and down to the forbidden shore, where the waves lapped hungrily at the sand. There, under the silver glow of the full moon, he saw her kneeling before the water, whispering. The river priestess stood beside her, silent as the tide. And then, the ocean stirred. A dark shape emerged from the waves. It was not human. Glowing eyes pierced the night, locking onto him. Then the creature spoke. "Toby, we have been waiting for you." His blood ran cold. He wasn't supposed to be here. He wasn't supposed to hear this. But it was too late. This is a story of fate, of forgotten debts, and of a man who was never meant to escape the ocean's grasp. Before we dive deeper into this epic tale, we'd love to know where you are watching from. Tell us in the comments. And if you love high-stakes fantasy filled with mermaids, magic, love, and sacrifice, don't just watch, be part of our adventure. Like this video, share it with someone who loves powerful stories, and hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow, we've got an extra special story lined up for you, and trust me, you won't want to miss it. Toby had always been a man of logic. He believed in bricks and cement, in numbers and blueprints. As a contractor, his world was built on firm foundations, not on whispers of spirits or stories of mermaids. So when he arrived in the quiet village of Jebu for his latest construction project, he paid little attention to the uneasy glances of the villagers or the way the wind carried murmurs of old fears. Jebu was a small settlement by the coast, a place where the salty breeze wrapped around clay huts and palm trees swayed like dancers in an endless rhythm. It was peaceful, far removed from the noise of the city Toby had left behind. But something about the village felt strange. His new house, a simple yet sturdy bungalow, sat on the edge of the village, close enough to hear the waves crashing at night. It was there that he first noticed his neighbor, Kemi. She was beautiful, tall and slender, with skin so smooth it shimmered under the sunlight. But it wasn't her beauty that caught his attention. It was the way her skin always seemed damp, as though she had just stepped out of the ocean. Even when she walked under the blazing sun, she never dried. Toby found it odd. Then there was the matter of her diet. One evening, after a long day at the construction site, he sat outside peeling roasted corn when Kemi walked past. "Good evening," he called out, offering her a piece. She smiled but shook her head. "No, thank you." He noticed she never accepted food from anyone. More importantly, he noticed something else, the way she avoided fish entirely. In a village where fish was a staple, Kemi never so much as looked at it. The villagers whispered about her, but never in full sentences. Just fragments of warnings and nervous glances. "She's different. She doesn't belong. She..." But no one ever finished their sentences. Toby brushed it off. He wasn't one to indulge in rumors. But then came the full moon. And everything changed. The days in Jebu passed slowly. The village had its own rhythm, calm and steady, like the waves that kissed the shore. Toby settled into his work, overseeing the construction of a school. The villagers were kind but reserved, treating him like a guest who would eventually leave. But Kemi remained a mystery. One afternoon, as he walked through the marketplace, he saw her again. She stood in front of a fishmonger's stall, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. The old fisherman, Baba Ade, held up a large catfish, its silver scales glistening. "This one is fresh," Baba Ade said. "Caught at sunrise." Kemi took a step back, shaking her head. "No, I..." Baba Ade sighed, his wrinkled face twisting in disappointment. "You never buy fish, Kemi." Why? The entire market seemed to pause. Women stopped pounding yam, traders halted their bargaining. Toby, standing at a distance, felt the weight of their silence. Kemi's voice was quiet but firm. I just don't like it. She turned and walked away, her long dress swaying behind her. The villagers exchanged uneasy glances before muttering amongst themselves. Toby frowned. It was unusual, yes, but did it really warrant such suspicion? He was about to move on when he felt a hand on his shoulder. Newcomer, a voice rasped. Toby turned to see an old woman wrapped in a faded shawl. Her eyes, clouded with age, studied him carefully. You live next to her, don't you? Toby hesitated before nodding. The old woman leaned in, her breath smelling of cola nuts. Watch her, she whispered. Especially on the night of the full moon. A shiver ran down Toby's spine, though he couldn't explain why. The full moon was only 3 nights away. Toby told himself it was nothing. Superstition. Old women and their stories. But when the night of the full moon arrived, something in his bones told him to stay awake. The village was silent, except for the distant sound of waves. The full moon hung high in the sky, casting long shadows over the huts. Then, just past midnight, Toby saw her. Kemi. She moved quietly, slipping out of her house like a shadow. Her feet were bare, her long dress whispering against the ground. Toby felt a strange pull in his chest. He should mind his business. He should go back to sleep. But his feet moved before his mind could stop them. He followed her. Through the narrow pathways of the village, past the empty marketplace, until she reached the shore. Toby hid behind a cluster of palm trees, watching. Kemi knelt before the water, her hands trembling. The air around her felt thick, heavy with something unseen. And then, from the darkness, another figure emerged. An old woman dressed in a tattered red wrapper. The river priestess. Toby's breath caught in his throat. The priestess bent down, dipping her fingers into the water. She whispered something in a language Toby didn't understand. And then, the water stirred. A shadow rose from the depths. Toby's body froze as he saw it. Glowing eyes. Long, dark hair floating like seaweed. A mermaid. Her gaze snapped toward the trees. And she spoke his name. Toby. Toby's stomach clenched. How did she know his name? Kemi flinched at the sound, turning toward the trees as if she, too, had just realized he was there. The mermaid drifted closer to the shore, her glowing eyes locked onto him. Toby, she called again, her voice soft as the wind. You carry the blood of those who wronged us. Toby's mouth went dry. The priestess turned to Kemi. You know the rules, she said. A sacrifice must be made. Kemi's body trembled. Please, she whispered. Not him. The mermaid smiled, baring sharp teeth. This time, the ocean chooses. Toby stumbled back, his mind racing. Sacrifice. Ocean. Bloodline. None of it made sense. But the priestess turned to him now, her old eyes filled with something he couldn't place. You should not have followed her, she said simply. The waves crashed against the shore. And deep beneath the water, something waited. Kemi found him the next morning, sitting on his doorstep, his hands gripping his knees. She didn't speak at first. She only stood there, staring at him with guilt-ridden eyes. Finally, she whispered, You were never supposed to see that. Toby let out a sharp breath. What was that? His voice was hoarse. Who was she? Kemi looked away. A debt. Toby frowned. When I was a child, she said slowly, I drowned in the ocean. I don't remember much, just the feeling of sinking, the cold, the darkness. I thought I was going to die. She closed her eyes. But she saved me. Toby felt the hairs on his arms rise. The mermaid. Kemi nodded. She pulled me from the water, placed me back on land. But nothing comes for free. Her voice trembled. She told me that a life had to be given in exchange for mine. Every full moon, a sacrifice must be made. Toby felt his heart thud. And if you don't give her one... Kemi's lips parted, but no words came. Then, in the silence, a single tear slid down her cheek. She will take me instead. Toby swallowed hard. Last night, the mermaid had spoken his name. This time, she didn't pick a random victim. She had chosen him. Toby's hands trembled as he poured himself a cup of water. The clay cup clinked against the wooden table, the sound louder than it should have been in the silence of his small home. Kemi stood near the doorway, her arms wrapped around herself. She looked exhausted, as if carrying the weight of her secret had drained her completely. Toby took a sip, his throat dry. Then, he spoke. "So, you've been offering people to the ocean." His voice was quiet, but the accusation was clear. Kemi winced. "It's not like that." "Then explain it to me, because from where I'm standing, it sounds exactly like that." She let out a shaky breath and took a step forward. "I don't choose them, Toby. The mermaid does. I don't even know who it will be until the moment she calls their name." Toby scoffed. "And what? You just watch. Stand there and let her take them." Kemi flinched, her fingers gripping the fabric of her dress. "You think I want this?" Her voice cracked. "You think I don't wake up every morning wondering whose turn it will be? Whose screams I'll have to listen to next?" Toby clenched his jaw. He wanted to be angry. He wanted to call her a monster. But the pain in her voice made it impossible. She wasn't just a bystander. She was a prisoner too. "I tried to stop it once," Kemi whispered, looking away. "Years ago. There was a boy, a traveler like you, who had no family in Jebu. The mermaid called his name, and I refused to bring him to the shore." Toby leaned in. "What happened?" Kemi swallowed hard. "The next morning, I woke up with salt water in my lungs. My skin was cold, my lips were blue. I couldn't move." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "She was dragging me under." Toby's stomach twisted. Kemi shuddered. "The priestess found me just in time. She took me to the river and begged the mermaid to spare me." "The mermaid, she was angry." Toby frowned. "But she let you go?" Kemi nodded, but her hands trembled. "She warned me. She said if I ever disobeyed her again, she wouldn't just take me." Her voice broke. "She would take someone I loved." Toby inhaled sharply. The weight of her words sank in. She hadn't just been following orders. She had been trapped, forced to choose between strangers and people she cared about. Toby clenched his fists. "Why me?" Kemi hesitated. "I don't know. She never explains why she picks people." Toby narrowed his eyes. "That's a lie." Kemi froze. Toby took a step toward her. "Last night, she said something. She said I carry the blood of those who wronged her." Kemi's breath hitched. "You know what that means, don't you?" Toby pressed. Kemi turned away, her shoulders stiff. Toby exhaled sharply. "Tell me, Kemi." Silence. Then, finally, she whispered, "You need to speak to Baba Ade." Toby frowned. "The old fisherman?" She nodded. "He knows the truth." Toby's pulse quickened. He didn't know what truth she was talking about. But he knew one thing for certain. If he didn't find out soon, the ocean would take him before he ever had the chance. Toby wasted no time. If Baba Ade had answers, he needed to hear them, before it was too late. The sun was beginning to set when he reached the old fisherman's hut, a small wooden structure near the docks. The scent of salt and drying fish clung to the air, mixing with the distant smoke of evening cooking fires. Toby knocked. A long pause. Then, slow, shuffling footsteps. The door creaked open, revealing Baba Aid's weathered face. His eyes, clouded with age but still sharp with wisdom, scanned Toby from head to toe. "You," the old man rasped. "I was expecting you." Toby's breath caught. "You were." Baba Ade didn't answer. Instead, he turned and hobbled back inside. "Close the door behind you," he muttered. Toby stepped in and did as he was told. The inside of the hut was small and dimly lit, a single oil lamp casting flickering shadows on the walls. Dried fish hung from wooden beams, and the floor was covered in woven mats. Baba Ade lowered himself onto a stool, groaning as his old bones creaked. He motioned for Toby to sit across from him. Toby hesitated. "Kemi said you know the truth." The old man exhaled through his nose. "That girl has carried a terrible burden," he said, shaking his head. "But she was right to send you here." Toby leaned forward. "Tell me. What did the mermaid mean when she said I carry the blood of those who wronged her?" Baba Ade stared at him for a long moment, as if deciding whether to tell him at all. Then, he spoke. "A long time ago, before your father's father was even born, there was a man named Obatund. He was a great warrior, a leader among his people." Toby frowned. "Obatund? I've never heard of him." Baba Ade chuckled dryly. "You wouldn't have. Your family does not speak of him. Not anymore." Toby's heart pounded. "What did he do?" Baba Aid's eyes darkened. "He waged war against the ocean." Toby blinked. "What?" "The mermaids of old had a pact with the people of Jebu," Baba Ade continued. "They protected our shores, calmed the storms, and in return, we honored them with gifts, pearls, woven silks, the finest carvings. It was a peaceful time." The old man's hands clenched into fists. But Obatund was greedy. He believed the mermaids had treasures beyond human imagination, gold, gems, things hidden beneath the waves. He wanted them for himself. Toby swallowed hard. "So he attacked them?" Baba Ade nodded grimly. "He led warriors to the shore. They captured a mermaid, bound her in iron chains, and dragged her to land. He demanded she reveal the location of their treasures." Toby's breath felt shallow. She refused. Baba Aid's eyes met Toby's. "So he killed her." A shudder ran through Toby's body. Baba Aid's voice grew softer. "The ocean never forgets. Her sisters cursed his bloodline. They swore that his descendants would one day pay for his sins." Toby's chest tightened. "His descendants?" Baba Ade nodded. "You, Toby." Toby's vision blurred for a moment. His great-grandfather, his ancestors, had done this. He shook his head. "That was centuries ago. I had nothing to do with it." Baba Ade sighed. "It does not matter. To them, blood is blood. And the ocean always collects its debt." Toby felt sick. "Is there a way to stop it?" he asked. "A way to break the curse?" The old man hesitated. "There is, but it is not easy." Toby leaned in. "Tell me." Baba Aid's voice dropped to a whisper. "You must enter the ocean yourself." Toby's stomach dropped. "And you must face her." Toby felt as if the walls of Baba Aid's small hut were closing in on him. The weight of the fisherman's words settled on his chest, heavy as a stone. "You must enter the ocean yourself, and face her." His mouth was dry. "What does that mean?" Baba Ade let out a long breath and stared at the flickering flame of the oil lamp between them. It means exactly what I said. Toby leaned forward. You want me to just walk into the water? And do what? Baba Aid's weathered hands tightened on his knees. You must find the mermaid. Not just any mermaid, her. The one who calls your name. Toby's stomach churned. And then, the old man's lips pressed into a thin line. You must listen. Toby frowned. Listen. That's it. Baba Aid's gaze sharpened. When the ocean comes for a man, it does not do so without reason. If she has chosen you, then she has something to say. And if you do not hear it, Toby, she will take you instead. The flickering lamp cast long shadows on the walls, making Baba Aid's face look older, almost skeletal. Toby inhaled sharply. What if I refuse? Baba Aid didn't blink. Then you will not see another full moon. A deep, cold silence stretched between them. Toby's heartbeat pounded in his ears. The thought of stepping into the ocean, to seek out the very thing that wanted him dead, made his skin crawl. But the alternative was worse. His fingers curled into fists. How do I find her? He asked. Baba Aid studied him for a moment before nodding. He reached behind him and pulled out a small, leather pouch. Toby watched as he loosened the strings and tipped it over. A pile of smooth, polished stones tumbled onto the wooden table. They were deep black, glistening like wet onyx. These are Agbara stones, Baba Aid said. They come from the riverbed, blessed by those who still honor the old ways. They will guide you. Toby hesitated before reaching out. The stones were cool against his palm. Baba Aid placed his hand over Toby's. But be warned. Once you step into the ocean, you will not return unchanged. A chill ran down Toby's spine. But deep inside, he already knew. His life would never be the same again. The night air was thick with humidity as Toby made his way to the shore. He could hear the distant crash of waves against the sand, steady and endless. The village was quiet. Most people were already inside, their doors shut tight as if they, too, feared the call of the sea. He gripped the pouch of Agbara stones tightly in his fist. Each step toward the water felt heavier, like something unseen was trying to pull him back. Then, just as he reached the shore, Kemi. She was waiting for him. She stood barefoot on the sand, the hem of her dress damp from where the waves had kissed the shore. Moonlight reflected off her dark skin, making her look almost ethereal. Toby stopped. You knew I would come. Kemi exhaled slowly. Baba Aid told you, didn't he? Toby nodded. He said I have to find her. Kemi's jaw tightened. You don't understand, Toby. She isn't just a spirit. She isn't just a mermaid. Toby frowned. Then what is she? Kemi hesitated. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, she is the first one. Toby's breath caught. What? Kemi took a shaky step forward. The mermaid who calls your name, she was the first to be taken. The one your ancestor killed. Toby's stomach twisted. She's the reason this curse exists, Kemi continued. She's been waiting, Toby. Waiting for someone with Obatund's blood to finally face her. The waves roared louder. Toby clenched his fists. Then let's end this. Kemi grabbed his wrist. Toby, wait. But it was too late. Toby took his first step into the ocean. The water was ice cold, even in the warm night air. It crawled up his ankles, then his calves. The Agbara stones in his hand seemed to hum, as if reacting to the touch of the sea. The moment the water reached his knees, he heard it. A voice. Soft. Calling. Toby, come. His breath hitched. Somewhere in the darkness of the ocean, something was waiting for him. And this time, he would listen. Toby stood at the water's edge, his heartbeat thundering like distant war drums. The waves lapped at his legs, cold and alive, whispering against his skin. "Toby, come." The voice slithered through the night air, a haunting melody that sent a shiver down his spine. Behind him, Kemi gripped his wrist. Her fingers were trembling. "Toby, you don't understand. If you go in, you might never come back." His jaw clenched. "Then tell me, how else do I stop this?" Kemi hesitated. I don't know. But there has to be another way." Toby turned to face her. "This thing has haunted my bloodline for centuries. If the only way to end it is by facing her, then that's what I have to do." Kemi's eyes glistened under the moonlight, filled with fear and something else, something he couldn't name. "Then let me go with you." Toby shook his head. "No. This is my fight." Kemi swallowed hard, her lips parting as if to argue, but in the end, she said nothing. She simply let go of his wrist, stepping back as if she already knew she couldn't stop him. Toby took a deep breath, then stepped forward. The water curled around his waist, the current pulling. And then, the ocean swallowed him whole. Toby didn't have time to panic. The moment the water closed over his head, the world shifted. He should have been sinking. Instead, he was floating, no, falling. Light twisted around him, not like the murky depths he expected, but something ancient. Ethereal. The deeper he fell, the quieter everything became. The weight of the ocean pressed against his chest, yet he could still breathe. The Agbara stones in his palm pulsed, guiding him downward. And then, he saw her. She was waiting for him. She did not move. She did not blink. She simply existed in the space before him, suspended in the deep like a shadow caught between worlds. Her skin was darker than the night sky, her hair floating around her like seaweed caught in a gentle current. Her eyes were glowing. A piercing gold that burned straight through him, seeing everything, his past, his fears, his bloodline sins. Toby's breath hitched. He knew who she was. The first one. The one his ancestor had betrayed. The mermaid opened her mouth, but no words came out. Instead, the water around him vibrated, the ocean itself speaking in her voice. "You have come." Toby swallowed hard. His voice barely carried in the water. "I need to know." "Why me?" The mermaid's eyes narrowed. "Why do the children of the guilty always ask?" Toby stiffened. "Because I didn't do anything to you." The water grew colder. "Neither did they," she whispered. "And yet, they still drowned." Toby's pulse pounded in his ears. Faces began to appear in the water around him, ghostly, flickering. The lost souls. The ones she had taken. Toby's stomach turned. "You could have taken my ancestors, but you didn't. Why wait?" The mermaid drifted closer, so close he could see the faint shimmer of scales on her collarbone. "Because you are the last." Toby's breath caught. "The ocean does not seek vengeance. It seeks balance," she continued. "And you, child of Tund, are the last of his line. The debt ends with you." Toby clenched his fists. "So I'm just supposed to die for something I didn't do?" The mermaid tilted her head. "Or give me another." Toby's blood ran cold. "What?" The golden glow in her eyes pulsed like embers. "A life for a life. Yours, or another's." A slow, sinking horror settled in Toby's chest. This was the choice. This was why she whispered in his dreams. Why Kemi had been forced to watch strangers disappear every full moon. The mermaid had never needed to take him. She wanted him to choose. And the full moon was rising. The ocean was waiting. Toby's mind reeled. The water around him felt heavier, pressing against his skin like the ocean itself was waiting for his answer. A life for a life. His, or another's. His pulse pounded in his ears. That's why you took them, isn't it? His voice was raw, carried by the currents. The ones who disappeared, they were sacrifices. The mermaid's golden eyes gleamed. Kemi chose them. Toby's breath hitched. No. That wasn't possible. Kemi, who stood at the shore, terrified for him. Kemi, who had begged him not to enter the water. Kemi, who had tried to stop him from coming here. She wouldn't. Would she? Toby swallowed hard. She didn't have a choice. The mermaid's gaze remained steady. Didn't she? The words echoed in his skull, twisting, unraveling something inside him. Kemi had told him the truth. She had said the mermaid demanded a sacrifice every full moon. But she had never told him how the sacrifices were chosen. Toby clenched his fists. What if I refuse? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The mermaid's expression didn't change. Then the ocean will claim what it is owed. The current around him began to shift, growing colder, darker. The flickering spirits of those who had come before hovered in the water, watching. Waiting. Toby's heartbeat hammered against his ribs. He had to choose. Toby didn't know how long he floated there, trapped between the past and the present, between justice and survival. All he knew was that the ocean was patient. It would wait. It would not let him go. Then, just as he felt himself slipping, a voice. Muffled. Distant. Toby. His eyes snapped open. The water around him trembled. The spirits wavered, their ghostly figures flickering in and out of existence. The mermaid's gaze lifted, turning toward the surface. Toby. Kemi. His heart lurched. She was calling for him. The mermaid's lips curled slightly. She has come to see what you have chosen. Toby's breath hitched. Had she come to save him, or to ensure he didn't escape? He didn't wait to find out. With a desperate kick, he surged upward. The ocean resisted, currents dragging at his limbs like unseen hands. The Agbara stones in his palm burned, pulsing against his skin as if pushing him forward. The mermaid didn't stop him. She didn't have to. She knew he wasn't running. He was going to the shore. And he was bringing her answer with him. Toby broke the surface with a gasp. The night air filled his lungs, thick and humid. He blinked, water streaming down his face as he searched the shore. And then he saw her. Kemi stood at the water's edge, barefoot and breathless. The full moon hung above her, casting a silver glow over the sand. Her eyes locked onto his. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Toby stepped forward. You knew, he rasped. Kemi flinched. Toby. You chose them, he said, his voice hoarse. The people who disappeared. You, his throat tightened. You picked them, didn't you? Kemi's lips parted. Then, slowly, painfully, she nodded. Toby's stomach twisted. At first. I didn't, Kemi said, her voice shaking. When I was a child, the ocean took people at random. It didn't matter who they were. But then, she gave me a choice. Toby swallowed hard. Kemi's eyes filled with tears. She told me, if I didn't choose, she'd take me instead. The ocean whispered at their feet. Toby exhaled shakily. So every full moon, you decided who would go. Kemi's shoulders trembled. I didn't want to. But I was afraid, Toby. I didn't want to die. Toby's hands curled into fists. He wanted to be angry. He wanted to yell, to blame her, to call her a murderer. But he couldn't. Because if he had been in her place, if the ocean had demanded his life, Would he have done anything different? The mermaid's words echoed in his mind. A life for a life. And now, it was his turn to choose. Toby stood frozen, the waves licking at his ankles, his breath shallow. Kemi had chosen. Again and again. And now, the ocean waited for him to do the same. The full moon cast a cold glow on Kemi's face, highlighting the tear tracks running down her cheeks. "Toby," she whispered, her voice barely holding together. "Please. You have to understand." Toby clenched his fists. "Understand what? That you fed innocent people to the sea. That you let them disappear without a second thought." His voice cracked, raw with something deeper than anger. "Hurt." Kemi shook her head fiercely. "I did think about it, Toby. I think about them every day. I see their faces in my dreams, I hear them scream when the waves take them. Her voice broke. I tried to pick the ones who wouldn't be missed. The ones who didn't belong. Strangers. Outsiders. It was the only way I could live with myself." Toby felt something sharp twist in his chest. The ones who didn't belong. The moment he arrived in Jebu, he had been an outsider. Would Kemi have picked him eventually? Had she already planned to? The ocean stirred at their feet. The whispering waves curled around Toby's legs, a silent reminder that time was running out. A life for a life. Toby turned away, staring at the endless black horizon. "You knew she would pick me, didn't you?" His voice was quiet. Kemi hesitated. I hoped she wouldn't." Toby scoffed bitterly. "But you knew." Kemi swallowed hard. "She's never chosen someone with your bloodline before. But this time." Her voice trailed off. Toby exhaled sharply, his heart pounding. He had two choices. Let the ocean take him. Or find someone else. His stomach turned. There has to be another way. Kemi's breath hitched. "If there was, don't you think I would have found it by now?" Toby squeezed his eyes shut. He had always believed in logic, in reason. But here, on the shores of a cursed ocean, there was no logic. No fairness. Only the law of the sea. And the sea wanted blood. The waves surged higher, creeping up Toby's calves, pulling at him. The mermaid was waiting. Toby's mind raced. There had to be something, anything, that would break the cycle. "You said it started with my ancestor," he said suddenly. Kemi blinked. "What?" "My ancestor, Obatund. He did something to her." Toby turned, his pulse quickening. "That's why she's been taking sacrifices. To punish his bloodline, right?" Kemi nodded warily. Toby inhaled deeply. "Then maybe I can end it. Maybe I can give her what she really wants." Kemi frowned. "Toby, what are you saying?" Toby didn't answer. Instead, he took a step back into the water. The moment he did, the waves surged forward. She was waiting. A shiver crawled up his spine, but he didn't stop. He let the tide pull him deeper, past his knees, past his waist. Kemi's voice rose in panic. "Toby, what are you doing?" Toby ignored her. He had made his decision. He wasn't going to run. He wasn't going to choose another victim. He was going to face the mermaid. And he was going to end this. The water closed over Toby's head, pulling him down, down, into the deep. The ocean swallowed him whole. But this time, he wasn't drowning. He was summoned. The moment he opened his eyes, she was there. The mermaid hovered before him, her golden gaze burning into his soul. "You return." Toby's jaw tightened. "I need to know the truth." The mermaid tilted her head. "You already know it." Toby's fingers curled into fists. "No. I know what happened after. I know about the curse. The sacrifices. But I don't know what started it. I don't know what Obatund did to you. A strange stillness settled over the water. For the first time, the mermaid looked hesitant. Then, slowly, she drifted forward. Her fingers brushed against his forehead. And suddenly, the ocean vanished. Toby wasn't underwater anymore. He was standing in the past. A grand kingdom stretched before him, its golden towers gleaming in the sunlight. The smell of salt and incense filled the air. People bustled through the streets, merchants shouting, children laughing. And at the center of it all stood Obatund. Toby's breath caught. The man was tall, his dark skin gleaming with oil, his robes embroidered with the patterns of the sea. But there was something cold in his eyes. Something ruthless. The crowd gathered before the palace steps, their murmurs growing anxious. Toby turned, following their gazes. And his heart nearly stopped. A woman knelt before the king. She was bound in chains, her hair damp, her dress torn. But even in her captivity, she was breathtaking. Her skin shimmered like fish scales in the sunlight. Her golden eyes burned with fury. Toby's stomach dropped. It was her. The mermaid. But here, before she was a spirit, before she was a curse, she had been something else. A prisoner. The king raised his voice. For defying the will of the kingdom, for luring men into the sea, you are sentenced to death. The crowd erupted in cheers. Toby's blood ran cold. This wasn't punishment. This was murder. He watched in horror as the guards lifted the mermaid, dragging her toward the shoreline. She fought, thrashing wildly, but the chains held firm. Obatund followed behind, his eyes burning with triumph. And then he raised his blade. Toby screamed. But no one could hear him. The sword plunged into the mermaid's chest. The water turned red. Her mouth opened in a silent cry, her golden eyes locking onto Obatund's face. And then she vanished. The crowd cheered. The king turned, his expression smug. But he didn't see it. Didn't see the way the ocean trembled. Didn't see the way the waves began to rise, dark and hungry. Didn't see the golden eyes flickering beneath the water. Until it was too late. The last thing Toby saw before the vision shattered, before the past crumbled into the present, was the ocean itself rising up against the king. And then darkness. Toby gasped as he was ripped from the vision, his body slamming back into the present. The water roared in his ears, his lungs burning for air. He kicked upward, breaking the surface with a violent gasp. The night was unchanged, the moon still hung above, the waves still whispered against the shore. But everything was different now. He knew the truth. Obatund had not been the victim. He had been the villain. The mermaid had not been a monster. She had been wronged. Kemi's voice broke through the chaos. Toby. She was still standing at the shore, eyes wide with fear. What happened? What did you see? Toby staggered toward her, his breath ragged. She was a prisoner, he said, his voice hoarse. Obatund, he killed her. Kemi's expression froze. The curse isn't just revenge, Toby continued. It's justice. She's been taking sacrifices because she was denied hers. She's been waiting all this time to make the bloodline pay. Kemi's face paled. Toby, if that's true, then. She swallowed hard. She won't stop until you're dead. Toby exhaled shakily. Not unless I stop her first. Kemi grabbed his arm. You can't fight her. You saw what she is. She's not just a spirit, she's the ocean itself. Toby clenched his jaw. He knew Kemi was right. He couldn't fight her the way he would an enemy on land. But there had to be a way. Because he wasn't going to be the next sacrifice. And he wasn't going to let anyone else be, either. Toby paced along the shore, his mind racing. The ocean shimmered in the moonlight, calm now, but he knew it was only waiting. Kemi stood a few steps away, watching him. Finally, she spoke. "What are you thinking?" Toby exhaled. "I need to talk to her again." Kemi's eyes widened. "What? No. You barely made it out alive." Toby turned to face her. "But I did. And now, I know what she wants." Kemi shook her head fiercely. "She wants you dead, Toby. You saw what she did to the others. She doesn't care about justice, she just wants blood." Toby hesitated. Was that true? Everything he had seen told him that the mermaid had been wronged. That she had once been innocent, until Obatund took her life. But centuries of rage, of sorrow, of waiting, had they twisted her into something worse? Was there even a chance of reason? Or was he already doomed? Kemi stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You don't have to do this," she pleaded. "You can still leave. The next full moon isn't for another few weeks. You have time to run." Toby shook his head. "If I run, someone else will die in my place." Kemi flinched. Toby softened his voice. "You've spent your whole life being forced to choose. But I won't let this continue." He met her eyes. "I need to end this." Kemi bit her lip, torn between fear and hope. Finally, she nodded. "Then I'm coming with you." Toby stared. "What?" Kemi crossed her arms. "If you're going to face her, you'll need me. I've been dealing with this curse longer than you have. I know the waters better than anyone." Toby hesitated. He didn't want to put her in danger. But he also knew he couldn't do this alone. "All right," he said at last. "We do this together." Kemi exhaled. "So what's the plan?" Toby turned to the sea, his heart pounding. "We call her." The waves curled at their feet as Toby and Kemi stood at the shoreline, side by side. Kemi took a deep breath. "The first time she appeared to me, I was 8 years old," she murmured. "I was drowning, and she saved me. But I think she saved me for this, for her game. To make sure there would always be someone to give her what she wanted." Toby swallowed hard. He clenched his fists, stepping forward. The cold water swirled around his ankles, sending a shiver up his spine. Then, he spoke. "I know the truth now," he called out, his voice strong. "I know what happened to you. What was taken from you. And I know why you're doing this." The ocean stirred. Kemi stiffened beside him. "Toby." Toby didn't stop. "You've punished my bloodline for generations," he continued. "You've taken life for life. But I need to know, is there another way?" Silence. Then, the waves shifted. The water shimmered, darkening, thickening. And slowly, she rose. The mermaid emerged from the sea, her golden eyes burning, her black hair floating around her like an ethereal veil. The air grew heavy. The waves whispered secrets. Toby took a shaky breath. "You've taken so much. But has it given you peace?" The mermaid tilted her head. "No." Toby's heart pounded. "Then let me end this." The mermaid's gaze sharpened. "You cannot undo what was done." Toby swallowed. "No. But I can make it right." The mermaid watched him for a long moment. Then, she raised a hand. And the ocean surged forward, wrapping around Toby and Kemi's legs, pulling them under. The last thing Toby heard before the water swallowed him whole. "Then prove it." Toby's world dissolved into darkness as the ocean pulled him under. For a moment, there was silence. No waves. No struggle. Just the cold embrace of the sea wrapping around his body like an unbreakable chain. Then, the whispers began. Soft voices, rising from the depths. They slithered into his ears, echoing in a language he didn't understand. He felt them in his bones, curling around his thoughts like tendrils of mist. Beside him, Kemi gasped, bubbles spilling from her lips. She clutched his arm, eyes wide with fear. And then, the mermaid appeared. She was no longer floating gracefully in the water. Now, she loomed over them, her golden eyes piercing through the gloom like twin lanterns. Her presence was suffocating, the sheer force of it pressing against Toby's chest like the weight of 1,000 tides. "You wish to make it right," she said, her voice curling through the water. "But will you pay the price?" Toby clenched his jaw. "I won't let this continue. Tell me what I have to do." The mermaid's gaze flickered to Kemi. "And you, little betrayer? Will you atone for your sins?" Kemi trembled, but she didn't look away. "If there's a way to fix this, I'll do it." The mermaid studied them both, then nodded slowly. The water around them shifted. Dark shapes moved in the depths, circling like hungry sharks. The whispers grew louder, turning into a rhythmic chant that made the ocean pulse with energy. Then, the mermaid raised her hand. "If you wish to end the curse, you must face the trial of the deep." A chill crawled down Toby's spine. What does that mean? The mermaid's lips curled into something that was not quite a smile. "You will see." The ocean roared. And suddenly, the world collapsed. Toby crashed onto solid ground with a force that knocked the breath from his lungs. He coughed, struggling to push himself up. The weight of the ocean was gone. He was somewhere else. The sky was red, the air thick and humid. Towering trees stretched into the heavens, their leaves glowing in eerie blue. The ground beneath him was soft, covered in moss that pulsed faintly like a heartbeat. Beside him, Kemi groaned, rolling onto her hands and knees. "Where are we?" Toby shook his head, pushing himself upright. "I don't know." A voice echoed through the air. "The first test begins now." The mermaid's voice, but she was nowhere to be seen. Toby's stomach twisted. "What do we have to do?" he called. The answer came in the form of a low, rumbling growl. Toby and Kemi froze. From the shadows of the strange forest, something moved. A shape, large, hulking, with glowing eyes that burned like fire. It prowled forward, its breath coming in heavy, guttural snarls. Kemi grabbed Toby's arm. "Toby." He swallowed hard. The creature stepped fully into the light. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. Its body was a twisted fusion of land and sea, part panther, part serpent, with dark scales shimmering beneath a thick mane of coarse fur. Claws like sharpened bones scraped against the ground, and its long tail slithered behind it like a whip. But its eyes were human. And they were filled with rage. The mermaid's voice whispered once more. "Face the sins of your ancestors." The creature lunged. Toby barely had time to react before the beast was upon him. He dove to the side, rolling across the mossy ground just as claws slashed through the air where he had stood. Kemi screamed, scrambling back. The creature turned, its glowing eyes locking onto Toby. Toby's heart pounded. He didn't have a weapon. He didn't have a plan. But he did have knowledge. "If this is a test," he said, breathing hard, "then there has to be a way to beat it." Kemi's eyes darted around wildly. "Toby, that thing is trying to kill us. Do you really think there's a riddle to solve?" Toby clenched his fists. "I think it's more than just a monster." The creature growled, circling them. Toby stared at its glowing eyes. The way it moved. The way it watched him. Then, realization hit him. His ancestor. Obatund. "This thing, it's him," Toby whispered. Kemi's eyes widened. "What?" Toby took a step forward. The creature snarled. Toby didn't back down. "You were the great king of the past," he said, his voice steady. "You built a kingdom. But you also built a curse. You brought this upon yourself." The creature froze. For a split second, its human eyes flickered with something, recognition. Toby took a deep breath. "You were a king," he said again. "But were you ever sorry?" The air grew heavy. The creature's breathing slowed. For the first time, it hesitated. Toby stepped closer. "You have haunted my family for generations. But your time is over. You need to let go." The creature let out a deep, shuddering breath. Then, its form began to shift. The monstrous features softened, its glowing eyes dimming. The fur receded, the scales fading. And standing before them was a man. Obatund. His face was etched with sorrow, his eyes filled with something that had never existed in life, regret. "I was wrong," the ghost of the king murmured. "And now, I pay the price." A sudden gust of wind tore through the air. The moment it touched Obatund, his form dissolved, turning into golden light, scattering like dust into the sky. Silence fell. Kemi exhaled shakily. "Toby, you did it." Toby swallowed. He didn't feel like he had won. Because this was only the beginning. The mermaid's voice echoed through the strange world. "One trial has ended. 2 remain." Toby's blood ran cold. The next test was coming. And he wasn't sure he would survive it. The red sky pulsed above them like a dying ember. The ghostly remains of Obatund had vanished, but the ground beneath Toby and Kemi still trembled. Toby wiped his damp forehead, his mind racing. 1 test down. 2 to go. Kemi clutched his arm. "Toby, that wasn't just a test. That was something real." He was real. Toby swallowed. Yeah. His heart was still pounding. He had seen the fear in Obatund's eyes, the regret. That wasn't just a challenge, it was a reckoning. Then the voice returned. "You have seen the face of the betrayer. Now, you must see the faces of the betrayed." The moment the mermaid's voice faded, the world shifted. A cold wind howled through the air, carrying voices. No, whispers. Thousands of them. Kemi gasped, her grip on Toby tightening. "What's happening?" Toby turned in horror as figures began to emerge from the shadows. Men. Women. Children. They walked barefoot across the strange land, their bodies flickering like candlelight. Some were missing limbs, others had deep wounds that still bled. Their eyes were hollow, their mouths moving soundlessly as they reached for him. Toby's breath caught in his throat. He knew who they were. The sacrifices. The people taken by the ocean. The ones who had died because of his bloodline. One by one, they came closer, their hands stretching toward him. Kemi took a shaky step back. "Toby, what do we do?" Toby clenched his fists. He wanted to run. His body screamed for him to turn and flee. But he didn't. Because he owed them this. He owed them the truth. Slowly, Toby stepped forward. "I see you," he whispered. The whispers stopped. The ghosts stilled, their hollow eyes fixing on him. Toby swallowed hard. "I know what was done to you. I know what my ancestor did. And I know what the mermaid has done in return." He exhaled. "I won't ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I will end this." Silence. Then, a woman stepped forward. Her skin was pale, her eyes sunken. But there was something familiar about her. Kemi gasped. That's the first sacrifice." Toby's stomach twisted. This woman, she had been the first taken by the ocean after Obatund betrayed the mermaid. She stopped in front of Toby, tilting her head. Then, in a voice as fragile as the wind, she asked, "How?" Toby hesitated. How? How was he supposed to break a curse that had lasted for centuries? But he had made a promise. He would find a way. "I don't know yet," he admitted. "But I swear, I will." The woman studied him for a long moment. Then, she did something unexpected. She smiled. It was small, faint, but it was there. The wind picked up, swirling around them. One by one, the spirits faded into light, dissolving into the air. And then, the mermaid's voice echoed once more. "One trial remains." Toby exhaled. His body was exhausted. His mind was spinning. But he wasn't done yet. Because the final test was coming. And this one would decide everything. The world around Toby and Kemi twisted once more. The red sky darkened to an inky black, the ground beneath them dissolving into nothingness. They were falling, plunging into the depths of the unknown. Then, with a sudden force, Toby crashed onto wet, solid ground. He gasped, blinking against the mist that coiled around them. Kemi was beside him, coughing as she struggled to her feet. They weren't in the strange glowing forest anymore. They were on the shore. A vast, endless ocean stretched before them, its waters unnaturally still. The waves did not crash. The tide did not move. It was as if the entire sea was holding its breath. Then, a ripple. A shadow slithered beneath the surface. And slowly, the mermaid rose. This time, she was different. She was larger, her body stretching high above them, her golden eyes burning with something ancient and all-knowing. Dark tendrils of water spiraled around her, and in her hands, she held a single blade, long, curved, and shimmering like moonlight on the sea. Toby's breath hitched. This was it. The final trial. The ocean had brought them here for one last judgment. The mermaid's voice echoed, low and haunting. "You have faced the sins of your ancestors. You have seen the weight of the lost. Now, you must make your choice." Toby's hands curled into fists. What choice? The mermaid slowly raised the blade. A sacrifice. Kemi stiffened beside him. No. The mermaid's golden eyes locked onto Toby. One life must be given to the sea. Only then will the curse be broken. Toby's stomach twisted. He knew it. He knew this was coming. Kemi turned to him, shaking her head frantically. There has to be another way. But the mermaid's voice was like steel. Choose, Toby. The water churned violently behind her. Give the ocean a soul, or be claimed by the tide yourself. Toby's mind raced. If he didn't do it, the curse would continue. More people would die. Kemi would be taken next. The ocean's hunger would never end. But if he did, if he took another life, he would become the very thing he swore to stop. The mermaid extended the blade toward him. Decide, before the moon falls. Toby's pulse pounded in his ears. His hands were shaking. He had come so far. There had to be another way. There had to be. Then, suddenly, a voice whispered. Soft. Barely audible. But it wasn't the mermaid. It came from the sea. Toby's eyes widened. The water was speaking. And it was telling him something. Something that might change everything. The voice from the water was faint, like the wind slipping between the trees. It wasn't loud like the mermaid's command, it didn't demand, it beckoned. Toby's breath hitched as he turned toward the sea. The water, which had been eerily still, now shimmered with an unnatural glow. Kemi clutched his arm. Did you hear that? She whispered. Toby nodded. The voice was calling only to him. The mermaid narrowed her golden eyes. Ignore the whispers of the dead, she warned. You must choose, Toby. There is no other path. But the voice persisted. Soft. Gentle. Ancient. There is another way. Toby's pulse quickened. Another way. He took a shaky step forward, his bare feet sinking into the wet sand. The ocean lapped at his ankles, alive in a way he had never felt before. Kemi held onto his arm. Toby, what are you doing? Toby didn't answer. He stepped deeper into the water. The mermaid's gaze darkened. Enough, she hissed, her voice crackling like a thunderstorm. She raised the shimmering blade, the water around her rising like massive hands ready to crush him. I have given you a choice. Obey, or perish. But Toby's feet kept moving. The deeper he went, the clearer the whisper became. The curse is not just blood. It is memory. It is regret. To break it, you must not take life, but give back what was stolen. Toby's breath caught in his throat. Give back what was stolen. Then, he understood. This wasn't about sacrifice. It was about restoration. He turned to the mermaid, his voice steady. The ocean never wanted blood, did it? The mermaid's grip on the blade tightened. You know nothing, boy. But Toby did know. He could feel it in his bones, in the very pull of the water around him. The ocean had never asked for endless sacrifices. It had wanted atonement. Obatund had stolen something. Not just a life, a promise. He had betrayed the mermaid and severed the bond between land and sea. The punishment had been centuries of suffering. But if the curse was about a broken bond, then there was only one way to break it. Not with death. With an offering. Toby turned to Kemi, his heart pounding. We have to return what was taken. Kemi frowned. What does that mean? Toby clenched his fists. I think I know. He turned back to the mermaid, stepping forward until the water reached his waist. You said I must give a life to the ocean. His voice was unwavering now. Then take mine. Kemi gasped. Toby, no. But he wasn't offering his death. He was offering his servitude. I will restore what was lost, Toby said firmly. The bond between land and sea. I will be the bridge. The mermaid's eyes flashed. The ocean rumbled. For a moment, the world paused. Then, the water rose. And everything changed. The waves surged forward, swirling around Toby's waist, then his chest. The air crackled with an energy older than time itself. Kemi screamed his name, but her voice was swallowed by the roar of the sea. The mermaid hovered above him, golden eyes burning. The blade in her hand shimmered, reflecting the moonlight that hung full and heavy in the sky. You would offer yourself. Her voice was laced with something unreadable, anger. Curiosity. Amusement. Toby stood his ground, though his legs trembled beneath the weight of the moment. Yes. The mermaid's gaze sharpened. Do you even know what that means? Toby swallowed. I don't know everything, but I know this, he gestured to the endless ocean. The curse isn't about blood. It's about trust. About a bond that was broken. If I have to give my life to restore it, then so be it. Kemi's hands clutched at the edge of the shore. Toby, don't do this. We'll find another way. But Toby knew there was no other way. He had felt it in the whispers of the water, in the weight of the spirits that had spoken to him. This wasn't just about sacrifice. It was about making amends. The mermaid studied him for a long moment. The waves crashed, the night trembled. Then, she smiled. Not a kind smile. Not a cruel one. Just, knowing. Very well. The water lurched. Before Toby could react, the waves dragged him under. Darkness swallowed him whole. The cold was unlike anything he had ever known. It wasn't just water, it was history. Memory. Pain. Toby thrashed, but unseen hands held him down, pulling him deeper. Shapes moved in the shadows, watching. Waiting. And then he saw them. The spirits of the taken. The sacrificed. The lost. They floated all around him, their eyes glowing like dying embers. And then, the first woman, the first sacrifice, drifted forward. Her voice was like a ripple on the water. "Will you take our place?" Toby's chest burned, his lungs screaming for air. But he forced himself to nod. The spirits whispered. The ocean shifted. And then they reached for him. Pain. It shot through Toby's body like fire, like lightning, like the fury of 1,000 storms. His veins pulsed with something ancient, something powerful. His skin burned, then cooled. He felt the pull of the ocean, the weight of the land. And then he breathed. Not air. Not water. Something else. His eyes snapped open. And he knew. He was no longer just a man. He was something more. Something new. The bridge had been restored. And the ocean had chosen him. Toby's lungs expanded, but no air rushed in. He didn't need it. The water was part of him now. It pulsed in his veins, whispering in his mind like a living thing. He was no longer sinking. He was floating. Weightless. Suspended in the deep. And he could see. Not just with his eyes, but with something else. He could feel the water stretching for miles, the currents shifting, the life that pulsed beneath the waves. Schools of glowing fish darted past him, their bodies forming strange patterns in the dark. A massive sea turtle drifted lazily above him, its shell covered in ancient carvings. Then, the spirits surrounded him again, watching. Waiting. Toby's heart pounded. What am I now? A voice, soft and gentle, rippled through the water. You are the offering. You are the bridge. Toby turned. The first sacrifice, the woman who had spoken to him before, was in front of him again. Her hair floated around her like a veil, her hollow eyes filled with something unreadable. Bridge to what? Toby asked, his voice echoing strangely through the water. To peace, she answered. The curse was never about blood. It was about balance. And balance can only be restored with a keeper, one who walks between land and sea. The realization hit him like a wave. He wasn't a sacrifice. He wasn't just a man anymore. He was the ocean's chosen. Its new guardian. Toby's fingers clenched. And if I refuse? The woman's lips curled into something that might have been a smile. Then the ocean will take another. Toby swallowed hard. He knew who they meant. Kemi. Toby felt the pull of the ocean inside him, calling him home. But his heart still belonged to the land. To Kemi. To Jebu village. I can't stay down here forever, he murmured. The spirits drifted closer, their presence pressing against him. Then go, the woman whispered. But know this, the land will never truly be your home again. You belong to the tide now. Toby's stomach twisted. Would he ever be the same? Would Kemi look at him the way she used to? Did he even have a choice? He turned, kicking his legs, pushing himself upward. The water swirled around him, resisting at first, then guiding him. The surface came into view, a blur of silver light. Then he broke through. The first thing he heard was Kemi screaming. Toby. The shore was wild, waves crashing violently against the rocks, the wind howling through the trees. Kemi stood knee-deep in the water, her arms outstretched, her eyes full of panic. And then she saw him. He staggered forward, coughing, but something was different. His skin glistened unnaturally, as if kissed by the moonlight itself. His eyes, once deep brown, now had a faint, golden shimmer. Kemi's breath hitched. "Toby, what happened to you?" Toby opened his mouth, but before he could speak, the mermaid rose from the water behind him. Kemi stumbled back, her eyes wide with terror. But the mermaid did not attack. Instead, she studied Toby with something that almost resembled approval. "The ocean has spoken," she murmured. "You are ours now." Toby turned to her, his heart pounding. "Then let the curse be broken." The mermaid smiled, slow, knowing. "It already is." A great wave surged forward, crashing against the shore. But it did not destroy. It cleansed. The air shifted. The tension that had held the village in its grip for centuries dissolved. The curse was truly over. But at what cost? Toby's gaze flickered to Kemi. He wanted to run to her, to tell her everything was okay. But deep down, he knew the truth. He wasn't the same man who had entered the water. And he never would be again. Toby stood in the shallow water, his breath heavy, his skin still tingling with the ocean's touch. The waves around him hummed, almost as if they recognized him as their own. Kemi's hands trembled at her sides. She took a cautious step forward, her eyes searching his face. "Toby, is it really you?" Toby swallowed hard. He wanted to tell her yes. He wanted to say that everything was fine, that he was the same man who had moved to Jebu, that nothing had changed. But the truth burned on his tongue like salt. His voice caught. It sounded different. The same, but layered with something deeper. Something ancient. He shook his head and tried again. "It's me, Kemi. But I don't think I'm the same anymore." Kemi's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Toby looked down at his hands. His skin was still brown and warm, but the water never dried from it, clinging like a second layer. When he flexed his fingers, he felt something beyond his body, the currents, the shifting tides, the pulse of the ocean itself. He wasn't just a man anymore. He was connected to something far greater. "I belong to the ocean now," he admitted softly. Kemi stiffened. No, you're still here. You came back." She grabbed his arm, her fingers pressing into his skin as if trying to ground him, keep him with her. "The curse is over. You don't have to go back." The mermaid behind them watched in silence, her golden eyes unreadable. Toby wanted to believe Kemi was right. That he could stay. That everything could go back to normal. But as he turned his gaze toward the shore, he felt it immediately, the land rejected him. It was faint, but it was there. The pull of dry earth no longer felt natural. The ground beneath his feet seemed unfamiliar, too solid, too still. He felt like an intruder in the world he had once called home. And worst of all, the ocean called to him. Its whispers curled around his mind, reminding him of his duty. He was not just Toby anymore. He was the ocean's chosen. And the ocean never let go. A sudden shout broke through the night. "Toby!" They turned. Villagers stood at the edge of the shore, their faces a mix of awe and fear. Some held torches, their flickering flames barely holding back the creeping darkness. They had seen everything. The curse ending. The waves pulling back. Toby rising from the sea. The village elder, Obatund, stepped forward, his staff pressing into the sand. His old eyes scanned Toby, lingering on the faint golden shimmer in his irises. "By the spirits," Obatund whispered. "The ocean has claimed you." The villagers murmured, some in reverence, others in fear. One man stepped forward, a fisherman named Jide. His voice wavered with uncertainty. "Does that mean the curse is truly over?" "Yes," Toby answered. He knew it with every fiber of his being. The ocean was no longer hungry for blood. The village was free. But another voice cut through the relief. Then why is he still here? Toby turned toward the speaker, a woman clutching her child, her eyes wary. If the ocean has claimed him, why has it let him walk among us? Is he still one of us? Or, her voice trembled, is he something else? Toby felt the weight of every gaze on him. The truth was, he didn't know. Kemi stepped forward, her jaw tight. He's still Toby. But was he? The villagers weren't sure. And deep down, neither was he. That night, the village held a gathering in the square, flames flickering in the moonlight. Toby sat apart from the others, Kemi beside him. Though the villagers no longer looked at him with fear, there was a distance between them, an unspoken question hanging in the air. What was he now? And what would he do next? Obatund finally broke the silence. Toby, the ocean has marked you. You are not like us anymore. His voice was not cruel, but it carried a deep sadness. You stand between two worlds now. Toby's hands curled into fists. But I'm still human. I still remember my life, my home. He glanced at Kemi, at the desperate hope in her eyes. I still love. Obatund nodded. Perhaps. But can you stay? The words struck deep. Toby thought of the way the land had felt beneath his feet. The way the ocean had whispered in his mind. The truth was undeniable. He didn't belong here anymore. His heart clenched. He turned to Kemi, his voice raw. What if I don't want to leave? Tears welled in her eyes. Then don't. The mermaid's voice drifted through the night, smooth as the tide. You cannot run from what you have become. Toby looked at Kemi one last time. Then, he turned his gaze toward the sea. The waves shimmered beneath the moonlight, waiting. Calling. The wind carried the scent of salt and damp earth. Toby's body ached, not from exhaustion, but from something deeper. A force was pulling him, stretching him between two worlds. His heart longed for the land, for the village that had welcomed him, for Kemi. But his blood, his very soul, now belonged to the ocean. The villagers murmured among themselves, waiting for an answer he didn't know how to give. Stay, or go. Kemi reached for his hand. You don't have to leave. Toby squeezed her fingers, but even as he held her, he felt the ocean pulling at him like an invisible rope. The water at his feet shimmered, beckoning. The mermaid stood nearby, silent and watchful. Then, Obatund spoke. The ocean does not give back what it has taken. A cold shiver ran down Toby's spine. Another villager, an older fisherman, stepped forward. His voice wavered with uncertainty. But if the curse is broken, does it matter if he stays? The mermaid finally moved. She drifted forward, her golden eyes gleaming. It is not a matter of if. He cannot stay. Kemi's breath hitched. Why? The mermaid's gaze didn't waver. Because he is no longer like you. Toby swallowed hard. The villagers' expressions shifted from curiosity to fear. Some took a step back. Others whispered among themselves. No longer like them. Toby looked down at his hands. His skin looked the same, but it wasn't. The water clung to him, never drying. The tide whispered in his ears. He could feel the currents deep beneath the surface, as if they were part of his own heartbeat. He was changing. Kemi gripped his arm. No. He's still Toby. He's still one of us. The mermaid tilted her head. Is he? Toby's heart pounded. Could he still call this place home? Could he pretend he was just an ordinary man? He already knew the answer. The night stretched on, thick with tension. Toby remained seated as the villagers debated his fate. Some feared him now. Others wanted to honor him. but it didn't matter. Because he didn't fit here anymore. The land, the air, it felt foreign. The weight of a human life felt heavy, unnatural. And the sea, it called him. At the edge of the village square, a boy approached, a child no older than 10. His small hand reached out, his wide eyes filled with wonder instead of fear. "Are you a spirit now?" The question lodged itself deep in Toby's chest. A spirit? A moon? Something in between? Toby exhaled slowly. "I don't know." The boy's brow furrowed. "Where will you go?" Toby lifted his gaze toward the waves. "I don't know that either." But he could feel the answer forming. As the first light of dawn touched the sky, Toby stood at the shoreline, Kemi by his side. The village remained behind them, watching in silence. No one dared to come closer. Kemi's eyes were red, her hands clenched into fists. "Please, don't do this." Toby cupped her face gently. "I don't want to leave you." "Then stay." Her voice cracked. He wished it were that simple. But even now, the water reached for him, curling around his ankles like an embrace. It knew. He didn't belong on land anymore. Toby swallowed the lump in his throat. "Kemi, you saved me. More than once. But if I stay, the ocean will never let me rest." A tear slipped down her cheek. "Then take me with you." His heart ached. "You can't come where I'm going." The mermaid swam forward, waiting. Toby turned to Kemi one last time. He pressed a kiss to her forehead, breathing in the scent of her, of earth and warmth and home. Then, he stepped into the sea. The water rose, curling around his body, wrapping him in its embrace. He took one last look at Kemi, at the village. Then, the waves took him. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, a shimmer. A ripple. And Toby was gone. The ocean had claimed its own. Toby did not feel the ocean around him as water. It was something else. A living force, a pulsing presence that welcomed him like a long-lost child. He did not sink. He became. The pressure that would have crushed a man did not touch him. His lungs did not scream for air. The deeper he went, the more he understood, he was not drowning. He was transforming. Shapes swirled in the dark, a school of glowing fish, a massive manta ray gliding like a shadow. The ocean was not silent. It whispered, it thrived, it watched. Then, through the shifting waters, the mermaid appeared. She was no longer just a lone spirit of the sea. Behind her, dozens of others hovered, their eyes gleaming like stars in the abyss. The ocean's court. Toby knew without speaking, he had been brought before them for judgment. The mermaids surrounded him, their forms shifting like water itself. Some looked like warriors, their bodies adorned with the bones of ancient sea creatures. Others bore the presence of something far older, guardians, keepers of forgotten laws. The eldest among them, a figure draped in flowing seaweed, studied him. Her voice rippled through the water, ancient and heavy. "The ocean has taken many." Her golden eyes locked onto him, piercing through his soul. "But you are not like the others." Toby straightened. "I didn't ask for this." A second mermaid, sleek and shadowy, tilted her head. "Neither did the first sacrifice. Neither did the ones who followed. But here you are." The elder's gaze did not waver. "The question is not whether you wanted this, but whether you will accept it." Toby's heart pounded. "What am I?" The mermaids exchanged glances. Then, the eldest spoke. "You are the bridge." The word struck something deep inside him. "The bridge between what?" Toby asked. "Between land and sea. Between the old world and the new. The curse is broken, but balance must be restored." Toby frowned. "Balance." The shadowy mermaid drifted closer, her voice a whisper in the dark. The ocean does not forgive, Toby. But it does not forget, either. Toby's pulse quickened. What does that mean? The elder's expression did not change. It means that the ocean does not simply take. It gives. It chooses. She reached out, touching his forehead with a single finger. And suddenly, he saw. The water around him shifted, and suddenly, he was not in the present. He was watching a memory. He saw a village, not Jebu, but one like it, older, untouched by time. He saw warriors standing at the shore, blades dripping with the blood of something that had once sung beneath the waves. He saw the ocean weeping. And then, rising. The curse had not begun with a single mermaid's sacrifice. It had begun with betrayal. Toby gasped as the vision shattered, his mind reeling. The mermaid's voice was calm. Now you understand. Toby's fists clenched. The curse wasn't punishment. It was vengeance. The elder nodded. And vengeance always leaves scars. Toby took a deep breath, the weight of truth sinking into him. What do you want me to do? The elder's golden eyes burned. Decide what comes next. Toby floated in the dark depths, the weight of the ocean pressing against him, not as a burden, but as a responsibility. The land will never accept me, he murmured. Perhaps not. The elder's voice was soft. But it will need you. Toby frowned. What do you mean? The shadowy mermaid circled him. Balance is fragile. The curse is gone, but what happens when men grow bold again? When they forget. Toby's stomach twisted. He had seen it in the vision. Humans always return to the shore with greed. If there was no one to guard the balance, what would stop the cycle from repeating? Toby's hands curled into fists. The ocean's whispers grew louder. He understood now. He had been chosen. Not to be a prisoner. Not to be a sacrifice. But to be a guardian. The elder mermaid extended her hand. The choice is yours, Toby. Will you take the ocean's gift? Toby hesitated. If he said yes, he would never be the same. Never fully human. But if he said no, the balance could be lost forever. He thought of Kemi. He thought of the village. He thought of everything that had led him here. Then, slowly, he reached forward and took the mermaid's hand. The ocean roared. A surge of power rushed through him. His skin shimmered, his veins pulsing with something more than blood. He felt the tides, the pull of the moon, the heartbeat of the ocean itself. He was no longer just Toby. He was the guardian of the deep. And his story had only just begun. Toby's body thrummed with newfound power. The ocean was no longer just water, it was a voice, a presence, a home. He could feel the tides shifting miles away, sense the silent songs of the deep-sea creatures, and hear whispers of forgotten truths carried by the currents. The elder mermaid still held his hand, but now, she looked at him with something different in her gaze. Respect. You are no longer bound by flesh alone, she said. You are of the deep now. But do not mistake power for immortality. The ocean gives, but it also takes. Toby nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle deep within him. I understand. The shadowy mermaid, the one who had first spoken of balance, studied him carefully. Do you? The land is still in your heart. You will feel its pull. You will long for what you left behind. Kemi's face flashed in his mind, her dark eyes filled with sorrow, her hand gripping his arm, begging him not to leave. His chest tightened. What if I go back? Toby asked. The elder mermaid's expression darkened. You may return to the land, but you will never be one of them again. You walk between two worlds now. That is the price of the ocean's gift. Toby clenched his jaw. He had already known the answer before he asked, but hearing it aloud made it real. His life would never be the same. The ocean around him stirred as if it sensed his uncertainty. The other mermaids drifted back into the shadows, leaving only the elder and the shadowy one before him. "You are the first guardian in centuries," the elder said. "The last was lost to time. We do not know how he fell. Only that the ocean cried for him." Toby frowned. "What happened?" The shadowy mermaid answered this time. "Men forgot their place. And the guardian lost himself." Toby's fists clenched. Would that be his fate? To watch over both worlds, only to lose himself in the end. He pushed the thought away. "What do I do now?" The elder smiled faintly. "You listen." She placed a hand on his forehead. And suddenly, the ocean spoke. It was not words. It was feelings, memories, warnings. He saw fishermen casting nets too deep, too greedily. He saw whispers of something dark stirring in the abyss. He saw the land forgetting the cost of their sins. And beneath it all, he felt a pull. A presence watching from the deepest part of the ocean. Something was waiting. Something old. Toby gasped, pulling away. The elder mermaid studied him. "You understand now, don't you?" Toby nodded. "The balance is still at risk." The shadowy mermaid circled him. "Then you must decide. Will you remain in the depths, or will you walk among men once more?" The ocean's current carried Toby upward, toward the shimmering surface. Every part of him still felt the sea, but his heart still pulled toward the land. Toward her. As his head broke through the waves, the sky above was painted with the colors of dawn. The village of Jebu stood in the distance, its fires still burning from the night before. Toby knew what he had to do. He had to go back. But this time, he was not just Toby the contractor. He was Toby, guardian of the deep. And his return would change everything. Toby emerged from the ocean with slow, careful steps. The water slid from his body, but his skin remained damp, refusing to dry completely. His senses were sharper than before. He could hear the whispers of the waves behind him, the rustling of palm trees swaying in the wind, and the distant heartbeat of the village. Yet, as he walked toward the shore, a sinking feeling settled in his chest. He was home. But he was not the same. Jebu had not yet woken for the day, but there were signs of life, faint flickers of light from cooking fires, the rhythmic pounding of grain against stone, the soft hum of morning prayers. Toby hesitated. Would they welcome him? Would Kemi? As he took another step forward, a voice cut through the silence. "You shouldn't be here." Toby turned sharply. Standing a few feet away was Baba Dyron, the village elder. His dark eyes held no warmth, only fear. Toby opened his mouth to speak, but Baba Dyron raised a hand. "I know what you are now." Toby's breath caught in his throat. You saw." Baba Dyron nodded solemnly. "The ocean does not give back what it takes." His gaze drifted to Toby's damp skin, to the way the water clung to him unnaturally. "You are not one of us anymore." The words cut deep. Toby clenched his fists. "I'm still me." Baba Dyron took a step back. "Are you?" Toby felt the ocean stir behind him, as if it, too, was waiting for his answer. The village began to wake. Doors creaked open, voices carried in the air, and before long, people started to gather. Then, a single voice rose above the murmurs. "Toby." His heart nearly stopped. "Kemi." She stood at the edge of the crowd, her eyes wide with disbelief. Her braids were loose from sleep, and her hands trembled as she stepped forward. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Toby saw the confusion in her eyes. The hope. The fear. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she asked, "You came back?" Toby took a shaky breath. I had to. Kemi swallowed hard. What happened to you? The villagers leaned in, listening. Toby knew the truth would frighten them. But he couldn't lie. I became something else, he admitted. The ocean changed me. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Obatund shook his head. I warned you, he said to Kemi. He is not one of us anymore. He belongs to the sea. Kemi's expression crumbled. No. She turned back to Toby, shaking her head. You said you'd come back. You said. Toby stepped forward, but the villagers flinched as if he were some creature instead of a man. Kemi didn't move. Toby's voice was quiet. I'm still me, Kemi. Her eyes searched his. And for a moment, just a moment, she believed. Then, from somewhere in the village, a voice shouted. Demon! And the first stone was thrown. The stone struck Toby's shoulder, sending a dull ache through his body. He barely flinched. It wasn't the pain that hurt, it was who had thrown it. Not a warrior. Not an elder. A young boy. A child, no older than 10, with terror in his wide eyes. Stay back, the boy screamed, his small hands shaking as he reached for another rock. You're not human. You should have stayed in the ocean. Murmurs of fear and anger rippled through the crowd. More villagers reached for stones, sticks, anything to drive him away. Toby's chest tightened. They had already decided. He was no longer one of them. Kemi's face twisted in shock. Stop it, she cried, throwing herself in front of him, arms spread wide. He's not a demon. Obatund's voice rang out. Kemi, move away from him. She turned to face the elder, desperation in her eyes. He's still Toby. The elder's face was grim. No, child. He is something else now. Toby swallowed hard. I came back to help. The villagers stepped back. Some clutched charms, whispering prayers of protection. Others kept their eyes on the water, as if the ocean itself might rise up and take them next. Obatund exhaled. Then prove it. Toby's heart pounded. How? The elder pointed to the horizon. The ocean was calm now, but something lingered beneath the surface. You say you are here to help, Obatund said. Then face the darkness that comes from the deep. Toby frowned. What darkness? A fisherman stepped forward, his face pale. Something is coming, he whispered. The sea has been restless since last night. The fish are gone. The wind is wrong. The ocean, it is watching. Toby felt the tide pull at his skin. He knew the fisherman was right. Something was stirring beneath the waves. Something old. Toby turned back toward the water, his senses heightened. The ocean spoke to him now, in ways he was still learning to understand. And it was whispering of danger. His veins pulsed as he reached out, feeling the shift in the currents. Something was rising. And it was not alone. A chill ran down his spine. Get everyone away from the shore, he murmured. Obatund's frown deepened. Why? Toby's voice was grim. Because something is coming. A sudden roar shook the waves. The villagers gasped as the water began to churn. The ocean was no longer still. It boiled, the waves rising higher and higher, too fast, too unnatural. Then, from the depths, a figure emerged. Toby's breath caught in his throat. It was not a mermaid. It was something worse. A being of the deep, its body covered in black, glistening scales. Its eyes glowed like molten gold, burning with ancient rage. Tentacles rippled from its arms, and its mouth, jagged, sharp, too wide to be human, curved into a smile. Toby had never seen it before. But he knew it. The ocean had shown him this creature in his vision. It had been waiting. And now, it had come for him. The creature tilted its head, its glowing gaze fixed on Toby. "You should not have come back," it said. The villagers screamed. Some ran. Others stood frozen in terror. Kemi grabbed Toby's arm. "What is that?" Toby's voice was tight. "Something that shouldn't exist." The creature let out a slow, rattling chuckle. "You were the ocean's gift, but you do not understand its cost." Toby clenched his fists. "Who are you?" The being's smile widened. "I am what the ocean left behind." And then, it attacked. The creature lunged. Toby barely had time to move before a whip-like tentacle lashed toward him, cutting through the air with terrifying speed. He dove to the side, the attack missing him by inches, but the force of it sent sand exploding into the air. Screams erupted from the villagers. Some ran, others stumbled backward, their eyes wide with terror. "Kemi, get back!" Toby shouted. But Kemi didn't move. She stood frozen, staring at the monster with a look of disbelief. What is that?" The creature let out a slow, chilling laugh. "She does not know." Its voice slithered through the air, deep and unnatural. "Poor child. You have lived beside the ocean your whole life, and still, you do not know its secrets." Toby positioned himself between Kemi and the beast. His pulse pounded in his ears. He could feel the ocean calling to him. The water churned behind him, waiting. The creature grinned, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. "You are the ocean's guardian now," it sneered. "But do you even know what you are guarding against?" Toby's jaw clenched. He didn't have time for riddles. "Leave this place," he warned. "Now." The creature's laughter grew louder. "Or what? You think you can fight me, little guardian?" Toby's fists clenched. The ocean had given him power. But he had never fought something like this before. Still, he had no choice. He had to protect the village. Even if the village no longer wanted him. The villagers watched in horror as the creature lashed out again. Toby dodged, barely avoiding the blow. But this time, he felt something shift inside him. The ocean stirred. A wave crashed behind him, the water surging forward as if answering his call. Toby's eyes widened. The ocean is mine to command. He took a deep breath and stretched out his hand. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the water moved. A massive wave shot forward from behind him, crashing toward the creature with unstoppable force. The beast let out a furious roar as it was knocked back into the sea, vanishing beneath the surface. The villagers gasped. Toby's chest rose and fell with heavy breaths. He did it. But then, the water began to boil. Kemi's grip tightened on his arm. "Toby." The ocean split open. And the creature rose again. It was angrier now. And this time, it wasn't alone. Dark shapes rose from the depths. More creatures. More beings from the abyss. They had been waiting. Watching. And now, they had come. Toby's stomach turned to ice. There were too many. The village could not fight them all. He had to end this. Now. The ocean whispered in his mind, urging him to act. But how? Toby gritted his teeth. There was only one way. He had to go deeper. He turned to Kemi, his voice urgent. "Take the villagers. Get them as far from the shore as you can." She shook her head. "No, I won't leave you." "You have to," he insisted. "Trust me." Kemi hesitated, then nodded. As she ran to gather the villagers, Toby turned to the creatures. And then, he stepped into the sea. The water welcomed him. and the depths pulled him under. The moment Toby stepped into the ocean, the water claimed him. It wrapped around his body, pulling him down faster than any natural current should. He didn't resist. He couldn't. Because something inside him had already changed. He didn't struggle for air. He didn't need to. The deeper he sank, the clearer his vision became. The darkness of the abyss should have swallowed him whole, but instead, he could see. Strange, glowing creatures slithered past him, their forms shifting in and out of focus. The water wasn't cold anymore. It was alive. And it was waiting for him. A shape loomed ahead. Toby's breath caught. It was not a natural formation. A massive structure sat at the bottom of the sea, covered in coral, barnacles, and twisting seaweed. It looked like an ancient temple, but older than anything humans had ever built. And at the entrance, they were waiting. The creatures from the surface stood in a circle, their glowing eyes fixed on him. But they were not alone. More beings, taller, stronger, covered in armor made of shells and bone, emerged from the temple's entrance. Their bodies moved unnaturally, shifting between solid and liquid, their limbs flowing like water one moment and hardening like stone the next. At the center of them all stood the first creature, the one who had attacked Jebu. It smiled. "You came," it whispered, its voice curling through the water like smoke. Toby clenched his fists. "I didn't come to talk," he said. The creature chuckled. "Oh, but you should listen. Because you are one of us now." Toby's heart pounded. "I am nothing like you." The creature stepped forward. "Then why did the ocean bring you here?" Toby hesitated. And for the first time since stepping into the sea, fear crept into his heart. The water around Toby hummed with energy. The creatures began to circle him, their bodies moving like shifting shadows in the dim light. "You don't know what you are, do you?" the leader mused. "The ocean touched you. Marked you. And yet, you still think like a landwalker." Toby's fists clenched. "I am human." The creature laughed. "You were." Toby's breath came faster. No. He refused to believe it. But deep down, he knew something was wrong. The way the water obeyed him. The way his skin never truly dried. The way the ocean had called him back, refusing to let him go. The leader watched him carefully. "There is no escaping what you are becoming," it whispered. Toby shook his head. "I am not one of you." The creature's smile widened. "Not yet." Then. They attacked. The first strike came from behind. A tentacle lashed out, aiming for Toby's ribs. He twisted, barely dodging, but another clawed hand came from the side, striking him hard. The force sent him tumbling through the water. But he didn't sink. Instead, the ocean caught him. Toby's eyes widened. The water itself slowed his fall, pushing him upright, stabilizing him. It was helping him. A surge of power flooded through his limbs. Toby didn't question it. He moved. The creatures came at him all at once. Toby dodged the first, then punched forward, but this time, the water followed his strike. A shock wave rippled through the sea, slamming into his attacker and sending it flying back. The others hesitated. Toby's heart pounded. He could fight them. No. He could win. The ocean was his weapon. And he was ready to use it. Toby's body moved like water, fluid, yet unstoppable. He had never fought like this before. The ocean responded to his every movement, pushing him forward, pulling him back, shielding him from attacks. It was no longer just a battlefield, it was a part of him. The creatures lunged, but Toby was faster. One came from above, its claws extended. Toby spun, calling the currents. A sudden blast of water shot upward, striking the creature midair and flinging it into the temple walls. The impact cracked stone. The others hesitated. But the leader, the one with glowing eyes, merely watched. Toby turned toward it, his fists clenched. "You said I was becoming one of you," he growled. "What does that mean?" The creature grinned. "You already know." Toby's pulse pounded. No. It wasn't true. But why hadn't he needed to breathe? Why did the water obey him so easily? Why did the ocean feel like home? The leader tilted its head. "The ocean does not give power for free," it whispered. "It changes those who belong to it." Toby shook his head. "I don't belong to the ocean." The leader's grin widened. "Then why do you hear its voice?" Toby staggered back. Because he did hear it. Even now, beneath the waves, the ocean whispered to him. Calling. Urging. Changing. And for the first time, Toby was afraid. The creatures surrounded him again, but this time, Toby's mind was spinning. He wasn't just fighting them. He was fighting himself. The leader watched him struggle. "You are standing at the edge," it murmured. "You can still choose. But soon, the choice will no longer be yours." Toby clenched his fists. "I will never become one of you." The leader chuckled. "Then why are you still here?" Toby's breath caught. The truth hit him like a wave. Why hadn't he swum back up? Why hadn't he run? Why did the ocean feel like his home more than the village ever did? He was no longer fighting to escape. He was fighting to belong. A deep rumble shook the sea floor. The temple walls groaned. The ocean itself was shifting. The leader's smile faded. It looked upward, eyes narrowing. "It seems you are not the only one being judged today." Toby frowned. "What do you mean?" Then, a voice, ancient and vast, filled the waters. "Guardian, you have come." The other creatures bowed. Toby's breath hitched. A shadow moved above him. Something colossal was descending from the depths. Something greater than all of them. The leader turned back to him. "You are about to meet the one who decides." Toby's chest tightened. This wasn't just a fight anymore. This was the ocean's judgment. Toby stared upward, his heart hammering. The shadow in the water was growing larger. A figure, vast, ancient, terrifyingly powerful, descended from the depths. The pressure in the water shifted. The creatures around him bowed their heads, silent. Even the leader, who had taunted him moments ago, lowered itself in respect. And then, a voice, so deep it shook the water itself, spoke again. "Guardian, do you know what you are?" Toby tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Because he didn't know. His fists clenched. "I am Toby," he forced out. "I'm just a man." The ocean rumbled. "No. Not anymore." Toby's breath came faster. "Then what am I?" The being moved closer. For the first time, Toby saw its face. It was not a mermaid. Not a monster. It was something older. Its body shifted like the waves, flowing between solid and liquid. Its eyes were endless, like the deep itself. And when it spoke, Toby felt the tide move inside him. "You are the ocean's heir." Toby froze. "No," he whispered. The voice did not waver. "You carry its blood. Its power. Its memory." Toby's hands trembled. "That's not possible." The being's gaze darkened. "Then why do you hear the call?" Toby swallowed hard. Because he did hear it. And for the first time, he could not deny it. The ocean churned around him. Toby wanted to run. Wanted to deny everything. But deep inside, he already knew the truth. His mother had always told him stories about the sea, about the ancestors, about the ones who walked the shore but belonged to the water. He had never believed them. Until now. His hands curled into fists. If I'm really what you say, then why don't I remember? The being's gaze darkened. Because the ocean does not give without taking. Toby staggered back. Memories, ones he didn't recognize, flashed through his mind. A temple beneath the waves. A storm that drowned a kingdom. A child, carried away by the tide, never seen again. Toby's breathing came fast and shallow. "That's not me," he whispered. It is you." The ocean's whisper curled around him. And for the first time, Toby realized he had never truly belonged to the land. Because his blood had always belonged to the sea. Toby's chest rose and fell in rapid, uneven breaths. He wasn't just any man. He wasn't just a contractor who had come to Jebu for work. He was something else. Something older. Something connected to the tide itself. The massive being before him, this entity that even the creatures feared, had called him the ocean's heir. Toby shook his head. No. No, this isn't possible. The being's glowing eyes did not blink. The ocean does not lie, Toby. His name, spoken by a voice so vast, so ancient, made the water tremble. You are saying I belong here? Toby's voice cracked. I don't. I was born on land. I grew up on land. My mother. He stopped. A memory. Faint. Fragile. His mother, sitting by the river, her voice soft as she told him stories of the sea. Of the lost children. Of the ones the tide called back. The ones who had been taken. Toby's hands clenched into fists. No, he whispered. I was never taken. The being's eyes glowed brighter. You were given. Toby froze. The weight of those words hit him like a crashing wave. His mother's warnings. The way she had always feared the sea. The way she had whispered prayers when the tide rose too high. She had always known. She had always known. Toby's breathing was ragged. The being stepped forward. The water around them stirred. The ocean never forgets its own. Toby's vision blurred. What had she done? What had she been running from? Toby's hands trembled. Tell me everything, he demanded. The being tilted its head. Are you ready to know? Toby's jaw clenched. I have to. The ocean shifted. Then, the voice spoke. Once, long ago, there was a woman who loved a man of the shore. But she was not of the land. She was of the sea. A daughter of the tide. Toby's heartbeat stopped. The voice continued. She abandoned the water. She ran. She bore a child, half of the land, half of the sea. But the ocean does not forget its own. Toby's fingers dug into his palms. It came for her. It came for the child. The water stirred. But the mother begged. She made a bargain. The ocean would not take the child. Not until the time was right. Toby's knees felt weak. No. No, this couldn't be. The voice rumbled. You were never meant to stay on land, Toby. You were only borrowed. And now, the tide has come to claim you. Toby's mind was spinning. He wanted to deny it. But the truth was clear. His mother had not been afraid of the sea because of superstition. She had been afraid because it had been waiting for him. And now, it had come to take him back. Toby's fists shook. No. He wouldn't just surrender. I am not a prisoner, he said. His voice was steady, but his heart was pounding. If the ocean wants me, it will have to take me by force. The great being regarded him. Then it smiled. "You misunderstand." Toby frowned. "What?" "The ocean is not here to take you. It is here to see what you will choose." The words sent a chill through him. "You mean?" His throat felt dry. "I have a choice." The being nodded. "Become what you were meant to be, or return to the land and deny your blood. But know this, if you turn away now, the ocean will never call you again." Toby felt the weight of those words. The truth was no longer a secret. He was born of the sea. It would always be inside him. But could he turn his back on everything he had known? Could he deny what he was? The water around him hummed with energy. The choice was his. And the full moon was rising. Toby's mind swirled like the ocean current. A choice. The ocean was giving him a choice. But was it really a choice at all? If he stayed, he would become something more than human. If he left, he would turn his back on everything written in his blood. His heart pounded. "I don't understand," he muttered. "Why now? Why not sooner?" The ancient being regarded him with those endless, glowing eyes. "Because the ocean does not take before its time." Toby's hands trembled. "Time for what?" he asked. The water stirred. "For you to remember." Then the ocean opened his mind. A rush of images. Toby's vision blurred. He was no longer in the temple. No longer in the present. He was somewhere else. Long ago. A storm raged over the sea. Lightning flashed, illuminating towering waves. The ocean churned violently, thrashing against the shores of a forgotten kingdom. And in the water, a child. Drifting. Alone. Toby's breath caught. It was him. He saw his tiny hands reaching out, his lungs burning as he tried to scream. But instead of drowning, the ocean carried him. Gentle waves wrapped around him like arms, lifting him instead of pulling him under. The storm roared. The tide claimed him. And then, a whisper. A voice from the depths. "You will return when it is time." The vision shattered. Toby gasped, his body jerking as he was pulled back into the present. He was still in the temple. Still surrounded by creatures of the sea. Still standing before the being that called itself the ocean's will. But now he knew the truth. The ocean had never been his enemy. It had been waiting for him. Toby's breathing was uneven. He looked down at his hands. They were shaking. The water around him felt different now. It wasn't just a body of liquid. It wasn't just something that carried life. It was alive. It had carried him. It had protected him. It had waited for him to return. Toby lifted his gaze to the massive being before him. "You knew all along," he murmured. The being nodded. "You were never lost. Only waiting to be found." Toby swallowed hard. He had spent his entire life believing he was ordinary. That he was just a man. But now he wasn't sure who, or what, he really was. The water hummed. The creatures around him waited. The oceans will gaze down at him, patient and eternal. Toby's heart pounded. The choice was before him. Stay, and become what he was meant to be. Or leave, and never hear the ocean's voice again. He closed his eyes. He thought of his mother. The sacrifices she had made. The fear she had carried. She had bargained for his life, but had she ever truly believed he could escape the ocean's call? Toby opened his eyes. And he spoke. The ocean waited. The creatures around Toby held their breath. Even the ancient being, the ocean's will, stood silent, patient. Toby inhaled deeply. The choice was his. And for the first time, he knew what he had to do. His mother had made a bargain to keep him away from the sea, but he was never meant to escape it. He had always belonged to the water. Toby lifted his chin and faced the great being. "I accept," he said. "I will take my place." The water shuddered. A deep hum echoed through the ocean floor, a sound so ancient that it made the very temple tremble. The creatures bowed. The oceans will regarded him for a long moment, then nodded. Then the sea welcomes its heir. And just like that, the transformation began. A strange warmth spread through Toby's chest. The water around him glowed. He felt light. His veins pulsed with something powerful, something endless. The ocean was not just a place. It was not just a force. It was alive. And now, Toby was a part of it. He gasped as his senses expanded. He could feel the waves far beyond the temple. He could hear the whispers of the deep. He could sense every living thing in the ocean, from the smallest fish to the mightiest sea beasts. Toby's fingers trembled as he looked down at his hands. The skin was still his, but now it shimmered with an iridescent glow. His lungs filled, not with air, but with breath that belonged to the water itself. He was no longer just a man. He was both land and sea. He was the ocean's heir. The oceans will watch him carefully. "You have accepted your truth," it rumbled. "But now, you must prove your worth." Toby tensed. How? The water around them darkened. And then, a roar echoed through the depths. A shadow moved. Toby turned sharply, his new senses tingling with warning. Something massive was approaching. And then, it emerged. A colossal sea beast. Its body was covered in dark, jagged scales. Its eyes glowed with fury. Toby recognized it instantly. It was the guardian of the deep. The one who had hunted him before. The one who did not believe he belonged here. The oceans will spoke. This beast has watched over the ocean for centuries. It does not recognize you. If you wish to remain, you must prove yourself to it. Toby clenched his fists. He would not back down. He had spent his entire life running from the truth. Now, he would face it head-on. The sea beast lunged. Toby moved instinctively. For the first time, the water did not resist him. It moved with him. He dodged just in time, twisting through the currents like he had been born to do it. The beast roared and turned, its massive tail sending shock waves through the ocean. Toby's heart pounded. He had to end this, not with brute strength, but with understanding. This creature was not just attacking him. It was testing him. Toby extended his hands and let the ocean's energy flow through him. His voice was steady. "I am not your enemy," he called. "I am one of you." The beast snarled. It charged again. And this time, Toby met it head-on. Their energies collided. A deep rumbling sound filled the ocean. And then, the beast stopped. Its glowing eyes locked onto his. It saw him now. Not as an intruder. Not as a land dweller. But as one of its own. The creature let out a deep growl, and then it bowed its massive head. Toby released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The oceans will spoke once more. "You have proven yourself." The water brightened. "You are no longer just a child of the land. You are now a guardian of the deep." Toby's heart swelled. He had done it. He had embraced his destiny. The ocean was his home now. But there was one last thing he had to do. Toby looked upward, toward the surface. The oceans will understood. "You wish to say goodbye?" Toby nodded. "To the people who cared for me." The ancient being smiled. "Then go. The ocean will always be here when you return. Toby rose through the water. He broke through the surface as the full moon shone down upon the waves. And standing on the shore, waiting, was Kemi. Her eyes widened as she saw him. Toby walked toward her, the water dripping from his skin. "You came back," she whispered. He smiled. "I had to." She hesitated. "Are you still you?" Toby reached out, took her hand. "I am," he said. "But I am also more." Kemi's eyes filled with tears. "I thought I lost you." Toby shook his head. "You never did." She squeezed his fingers. "What happens now?" she asked. Toby looked back at the waves. The ocean was waiting. "I belong to the sea now," he admitted. "But I will never forget the land. Or the people I love." Kemi exhaled shakily. "Then promise me something." "Anything." She met his gaze. "Promise me you'll never disappear again." Toby smiled. "I promise." The ocean roared behind him. The tide called to him. But now, Toby knew. He would never be lost again. Because the ocean was not his prison. It was his home. And he had finally found where he belonged.